a lot of times in sacred scripture, we're so removed from the context of the text that we forget, or we just don't know how big of an impact or explosiveness it could be. When we hear the words that Abraham, as it says, St. Paul says, is the father of us all. And we call, even in our Catholic tradition, we call Abraham the father of our faith. We just glance over it and don't take it for granted, but to a first century Jew who is now a believer in Jesus as the Christ, big impact. It's like one of those double glances, like, what, did St. Paul really just say that? Abraham, the father of us all? Well, yes, he did. I'll incorporate a little bit of yesterday's first reading into the homily this morning. So, one of the things that St. Paul's trying to address at this point in his letter to the Romans is, again, I think an issue that for most of us daily mass goers we're familiar with, but the idea of the role of circumcision in the matter of our salvation. That does one need to be circumcised to be a part of God's saving action? St. Paul will conclude with an emphatic no, but how he gets to that point is very important, because he's going to go and he's going to do some scripture exegesis of the Old Testament, my favorite thing to do here. And so he's going to go to Genesis 15. He went there yesterday. Okay. Abraham is questioning in Genesis 15, questioning whether God is going to deliver on his promises of the descendants that he has promised Abraham. Abraham and his wife Sarah are barren. They have no children. They're well past childbearing years. How is this going to happen? And from when God made the promise to when it actually happens is over a course of years, if not decades. Okay. And we think we're impatient, with God answering our prayers. And Abraham's struggling. And so in Genesis 15, what happens? Abraham is escorted outside. He's called to look up to the sky, which is its daylight. And God asked Abraham to what? To count the stars if he can. Which he can't, because it's daylight. But they're there, right? They're there. And it says that because Abraham believed and trusted in God, his faith in God, that it was credited to him as righteousness. That word righteousness, if you haven't noticed, has been appearing a lot in this letter to the Romans. Righteousness of God, righteousness of God. All right? And so St. Paul says that Abraham's faith and trust in God, in that promise that he made to him, he is now made righteous. And so how is Abraham made righteous? Not through circumcision and not through any of his works, but in his faith and trust in God and in his promises. And so that's what St. Paul argued yesterday, and he's continuing to argue today. And then on top of that, again, it's credited to him as righteousness, Genesis 15. Abraham isn't circumcised until Genesis 17. So what St. Paul is saying is that circumcision did not have a role in Abraham's righteousness, but more it's a sign. It's a sign of God's promises and of God's righteousness. It's a sign. But it's not the actual thing that made him righteous. And so as we continue on today, St. Paul then draws on that faith of Abraham and says that's how everyone, Jew and Gentile, and everyone right here in Mount Penn, right here in 2023, we are made righteous by what? By the action of God, but in our faith in him. And that's how Abraham is our father in faith. Not through a biology or ethnicity, but through Abraham's faith. And that's what God has given, and that's what St. Paul is bringing us, into this letter to the Romans. It's our trust in God and his promises. And most of all, most importantly, what's the greatest thing? Forgiveness of sins and the resurrection of the dead, destroying sin and death in our lives. It's done, and we're made righteous because God is gracious and merciful, willing to bestow on it, but we just have to believe in it. May God bless you.